All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. For those of you that have joined us, thank you so much for being here today. We're really excited to give you a little taste of what it looks like to be a solar land host with GreenSpark. We've got a great presentation lined up to really cover all the bases. And then thank you to all of you who did submit questions ahead of time. At the end, we will make sure we get through all of those. But just a little plug, if there's at any point you'd like us to dig a little deeper, you have a follow-up question to anything we're covering, feel free to drop that in the chat and we'll take a pause and just make sure we hit that quick. So just want to introduce our awesome presenter, Matt Vanderbrook. He's GreenSpark's Director of Commercial Origination, which means he's responsible for all of our large-scale solar and storage development across New York State. He's got over 15 years of experience, so brings a wealth of expertise, very tapped into New York State policy and everything that's going on with our evolving industry, and really is a wealth of information. So like I said, don't be shy, drop those questions in here. We want to make sure that we've answered all of your questions about land hosting and land hosting with GreenSpark. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kelsey. Excited to have a great group of attendees here. And yeah, excited to talk through, our process and sort of just in general how land hosting for solar works in New York. And as Kelsey mentioned, lots of good questions. So hopefully we'll address a lot of them, but as we said, feel free to jump in with questions or we can answer it there at the end. So just getting started here. So for those who don't know, GreenSpark Solar, so we are actually celebrating our 23rd anniversary next week as a company. So we've been through all the ups and downs that have happened in the renewable energy industry over the last couple of decades, and I've made it through, and we're bigger than we have ever been. We're about 140 employees at this point, solely working on solar, and that's in sort of both the development and construction space, working in residential projects as well. So, but yeah, excited to be with everybody, and it's been a wild ride at GreenSpark, and so we can sort of share a lot of different stories about our experiences. But as you can see, lots of different memberships. We're certified B Corporation, gold status installer with NYSERDA, Amicus Solar member, which is a national buying cooperative. So lots of industry connections, and have been doing this for a long time. I just mentioned the B Corporation. Being a certified B Corporation means basically there's an independent review and scoring of our company every couple of years. Basically, they're evaluating our, how we treat our employees, what we do for our community, what we do for our planet. It's a great organization. We've been a B Corp member for about a decade now, just to demonstrate our commitment to, our community and employees, and employing a triple bottom line in how we approach things in our business space. So, like I said, been in the business for a long time. We've installed over 350 megawatts of solar. Most of that has been in New York State. So we, have a lot of experience around New York and how projects get done. We like to see ourselves as a long-term steward and partner that is for all stakeholders in the project, the communities we build in, the landowners we work with. And basically, we're involved from a project from the beginning to the end in sort of a development setting. We also build a lot of projects for other groups. So those projects are ones that we don't actually develop, but we are involved in their construction and sort of the long-term maintenance and operation. So we like to see ourselves as sort of being as part of a project from throughout its entire lifetime. Just jumping forward, right? I think this slide is to demonstrate sort of New York's commitment to supporting renewable energy. It is our success as a company is a lot of it's attributable to like the efforts in New York State to advance these projects. Goals like 70% renewables by 2030, goals around electric vehicles and zero emissions from new building construction. So New York's put a lot of effort into supporting this, and like the economics, the results show, right? Like clean energy is one of the fastest growing employers in New York State. And that's attributable to a lot of the efforts that the state has put forward. And, that's one of the reasons that we're headquartered here and remain here is because of that support that New York provides. So we're just gonna like high level walk through, how this works. Every project is unique. Every project has different aspects of that, of how either they're going to interconnect or walk through permitting and all that stuff. So this will be pretty high level. But as we said, we can certainly get into the weeds. And if people are interested in, if you have a piece of land that you're interested, or you're just kind of generally looking for more information, we're happy to schedule some meetings afterwards just to talk through some more. So, the big question is like, why would I do this? Why would someone who has a piece of land consider this? And it's obviously a huge question. It's a long-term commitment, right? Like it's a minimum of 25 years that you would be leasing your land in this setting. So like there's a lot of questions and things that you need to review before you're going to make a commitment like that, obviously, right? So the way we structure these generally is through a lease. So we'll provide a lease agreement that I mentioned, right? Sort of a baseline of 25 years with a renewal period. Part of that lease, right, is going to be an annual lease payment. So that lease payment is going to be based on a number of factors, but ultimately it's a per acre payment that you'll get every single year. And it's a way, right? It's passive income, right? We're not looking for the landowner to put any money up front to do any of this work. It's all sort of, the risk is all on us to figure out all that details. And it provides an opportunity if in the right setting, like maybe someone has a piece of land that they're not doing a lot with, maybe it's not ideal for agriculture or for other reasons, like we can make use of it potentially with solar. And again, every project is different, and not every project works, and we can get into those reasons, but it is a good option to explore if you have a chunk of land that you would want to make available. And I think the argument that we make for a lot of folks, because I think we get a fair amount of pushback about well, you're taking this land away and it's not going to be able to be used for agriculture or other reasons. And so we sort of look at it as like, well, this actually provides a way that landowners, farmers particularly, can get some supplemental income to help deal with all of the other issues that they're dealing with, right? Like, I think there's been, agricultural prices have been going down, so there's less income coming from that. Property taxes are going up. So this is sort of one of those ways that you can actually offset some of those costs and maybe provide some longer term stability to your business, your farm operation, or just to your family's future. So we have a lot of landowners that we've worked with that see it as like a long term, right? Like they're planning on handing off this piece of land, this agreement, to their family members, and provide sort of that legacy of income that they can help provide stability to their descendants. So and yeah, so I mean, it's just New York State has set out a lot of goals to support locally generated clean energy, and this is the way that we can do that, and solar is sort of the fastest way you can deploy renewable energy or new energy generation. You can put it in faster than a wind turbine or a coal plant or a gas plant or anything like that. So it's really one of the fastest ways and cheapest ways to get new electricity generation on the grid. So, I think, again, as I mentioned, the farmland question, right? New York State, especially Western New York, where we do a lot of our work, there's a lot of farmland. And so we're very cognizant of, where we put this land, and then working with New York State Ag and Markets. We've worked with other land trusts locally to make sure that we're, employing best practices, and ensuring that we can provide some long-term stability to the land. So, we mentioned we follow smart solar principles from the Farmland Trust. We try to site the project in such a way that it's not impacting, agricultural uses as best as we can. Sometimes, the land is, maybe not as big and maybe there's not a lot of flexibility. So we try to have to work around those issues, but we make our best efforts there. And then as you can see in this image, right, like this is one of the things that we've done on a number of projects where we're actually bringing grazing animals, generally sheep, out to sites to eat the grass instead of bringing in having to pay someone to bring in a big lawnmower to go through all these rows. We just bring in sheep a few times a year in the summertime, and they graze, and they go on to the next site. So that's become a pretty common standard practice in New York State, and we're seeing a lot of success with it, and we'll continue to keep deploying that. So here's, these are just kind of some general guidelines around land requirements. Again, it can depend on where you are, right? There's, as you get further downstate, the acreage requirements might be a little less just because electricity prices are more expensive there, and we could make a smaller project work. So these are just kind of like the general overview, 20 or more acres. And the reason that is, like, typically one of our projects is around 20 acres. That's kind of the general size of a system. But because, around permitting requirements or, what the other specific setback requirements are in a town, it's unlikely we'd be able to build a 20-acre array on a 20-acre parcel, right? So the more land we have available, the more likely we are to get to the larger system size. But as I said, we can make smaller projects work. I mean, we've built in a number of projects now that are in the 10-acre range. So there's certainly some flexibility there. But the more acreage that's available, the more flexibility we have in sort of siting and the permitting process. We want to be close, very close to 3-phase power. You can, if it's single phase, which you'll see in a lot of more rural areas, we can extend 3-phase, but usually it becomes cost prohibitive at a certain distance. So we want 3-phase power pretty close by, as well as a higher voltage circuit, right? So sometimes there's not to get too far in the weeds, but there's different voltages on the circuits. There's 5 kV, 13 kV, 34 kV. The larger the kV, the better. Again, it doesn't mean we can't do it, but it just provides a little more flexibility. And supportive solar code, right? New York has several thousand different permitting jurisdictions, towns and villages, and we have to work through each one, and each one has unique requirements. And sometimes sometimes we can work through them. They're not too prohibitive, and other times they can be very challenging to make work. So, at the early stage of any project, we do an analysis of the permitting and see, is there a path here, or is there going to be a lot of challenges to get a project permitted? And that last point is based around the interconnection queue and the capacity. So we interconnect our systems on a circuit that is fed by a substation. That substation, per the utility, has a limited amount of capacity, generation capacity that it will accept. New York State, we've been doing this for close to a decade at this point. And so most substations have some projects in them, and a lot of substations are completely at their capacity. There's some rule changes that are being contemplated that could change that in the future. But right now there's not a huge amount of substations that haven't had projects put on them. So again, similar to the solar code, if someone comes to us and they say, hey, can you look at this site? One of the first things we do is look at the utility interconnection. There's maps available and interconnection queues to understand what's going on there. And in a lot of cases, we can't do a project because if there's 3 or 4 projects already on there, they're taking up that capacity, and there's not much we can do. But there are still certainly places where you can find that capacity, and so that's one of the things that we try to do early on. Just kind of the financial piece of this, which I think is what everybody cares most about, is sort of what you're going to get from a lease payment. we like to provide people a range of prices, right? Because there's a lot of information that we have to figure out before we can lock in and say, okay, this is what we can do. Generally, where we're seeing the projects land is somewhere between $1,500 to $2,000 per acre per year. Generally, our projects are somewhere around 15 to 20 acres. So, you could see a lease payment somewhere in the $30,000 to $40,000 range for a larger project, and sort of can go down from there. Again, the interconnection of the project has a big impact on what we can pay. So, we submit our interconnection application and go through this pretty long process with the utility. And eventually they will deliver to us a study that will say, okay, we will let you interconnect your system. It's going to cost this much to do it. And so we are, right, wrong, or indifferent, we pay to upgrade substations and distribution lines that the utility probably should have done several decades ago. But that's just kind of the cost of doing business. So we have to, we get that cost, and then we have to factor that into our overall project financial model and see how it works, right? Sometimes we get interconnection costs that are reasonable, which is usually under $1 million. And, we have to see how that works with the project. And oftentimes we get ones that are obscenely high, and we really can't do a project. So like we've gotten ones not that long ago that were in the $40 to $50 million range. That is not a price that any of these projects can afford. So that's sort of ones that, like, at that stage we have to say, unless there's some other avenue or some other path, like those projects would get, we would stop pursuing those projects at that point. So, and again, it's a pretty, although we can understand it fairly early on, there is a process that takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months to really get a handle on what the interconnection of a given project is going to look like. So there are no guarantees in this. Even if we look at a site and say that looks pretty promising, until we get through that process, there's not much guarantee that we can do anything until we get that information back. As I mentioned, our lease agreements are baseline is 25 years, which is the actual warranted life of the solar panels, and then they generally will include some optional extensions that can go out up to 40 years. And that's pretty standard for the project. And right, those lease payments would obviously continue for the lifetime of those agreements. And then the land host, there's no other obligations, right? We're signing a lease, we're leasing a chunk of land. It's all going to be, it's basically going to be sub-parceled or subdivided depending on the town. And then all the obligations of that parcel are on us and the project owner to understand. Yeah, so this is just a quick overview of like the project structure, just kind of some of the stakeholders, right? So the landowner, obviously, the developer and construction contractor, which is GreenSpark, project owner, and then the off-taker. So GreenSpark, we are not an asset owner. We do not own these projects. Someday, fingers crossed, we would like to be that. But we are the developer and ultimately the contractor for our projects. So oftentimes, and not to suggest that we're like the only ones that do this, or there are other companies that are similar to us, but a lot of people that are active in New York or any other state, they might just be pure play developers. They're just getting sort of all of the major development milestones figured out. Your interconnection, your permits, securing the land, and then they're packaging it up and they'll be potentially selling it to another group. And we do that but then as part of our sale, we are building the project. So that's kind of our main, the main thing that we do as a company is we're a construction contractor. That's our bread and butter. That's what most of our work is doing. And so we're really developing projects to feed the construction beast, as we call it. And kind of gives us flexibility and the ability to develop our own projects and sort of be able to time them and get some additional flexibility. So that's generally how we work. Other companies will just be developers. Some companies will develop and own. So there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing that. And project owner, right? So I mentioned that, and then off taker. So in New York State, every single solar project on the distributed side needs an off taker. So basically it generates bill credits, and those bill credits have to go to someone that is in the same utility. So I'll give an example. We did a project recently with Home Leasing, which is an affordable housing group based here in Rochester. And basically the project generates electricity credits, and all those credits are then allocated to home leasing. All of them have to be within the same utility zone. So those are the types of things. And we've done community solar where it's residential, or we've done a blend of residential and commercial. So that's one of the key parts of these projects is to have an off taker for them to move forward.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah.
before you move on, this goes back to more of the land requirements
Yeah.
outline that you provided. We got a question in the chat that asked, does the land have to be zoned commercial or does it matter?
It depends, right? Like I think every town will have a different code, and that code will say, some of them have a specific solar code that says you can build solar. It probably will be a residential part, and then a small commercial, and then a kind of a larger ground mount. And they'll say you can build these projects in these zoning districts. Sometimes it's residential agriculture and commercial and industrial. Sometimes it's just industrial. So every town is unique that way. So it's something, like I said, we look into that. And some towns don't have solar codes at all. And in those cases, we might have to get a special permit, or, oftentimes they'll work on drafting their own code to deal with this. So it's sort of on a site-by-site basis.
Awesome. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, great question. So just kind of, as I mentioned, like some of the practices that we employ, right? There's agrivoltaics is kind of the term to talk about like how you're incorporating agricultural practices within a project. It could be a technological thing. It could be, sometimes they're elevated so you can get equipment in there. Other times it's, you're employing grazing. It's planting pollinator plants to support bees and, butterflies and other things like that. So there's a lot of different ways, different practices that we employ. And I think the industry is, seemingly getting better and better at how to incorporate that stuff into these projects and make their impacts, right? There is no question that there is impacts from these projects on the land, but to, lessen those impacts by using these types of practices.
Matt, we got one more question in the chat, actually, two more.
Yeah.
How is the project connected to the grid, overhead or underground?
Yeah, so we have to tie into a distribution circuit. So like the regular, utility poles that are outside someone's house, that's where we tie into. And so we'll, we have to set up our own poles. Usually it's 4 or 5 utility poles that we put at the entrance of our project. And then we're interconnecting into a distribution circuit there. And then that's going back to a substation. On the site itself, like it's a mix, like usually we're underground, some cases we're above ground. So it sort of does depend on what that looks like on a given site.
Awesome. And then the next one is, can the interconnection area connect with wind power?
So generally, I mean, we have not done anything like that. I mean, generally wind farms in New York are transmission level. So transmission is it's sort of just a different animal. So our projects interconnect on local distribution grids. There's a substation, it's feeding a neighborhood. We're putting our system into that. Whereas a transmission level wind farm, and even there are transmission level solar farms, you're basically building your own substation that's dedicated to your project. And that's going on the New York ISO grid, which is, you drive down the thruway and there's a 100-foot tall utility transformer. That's where that generation is going. So they're slightly different. I think an area where there is a wind farm, like there's probably some potential for more capacity there, but it really does depend.
Awesome. We got two more questions,
All
Matt.
right. I like
Um,
it.
yeah, this is great. Thank you so much, everyone, for your engagement. So one is related to like any assessments we've done already. So we sent out invitations to everyone to join this webinar. So the question is, have we already done any kind of, feasibility, usability assessments based on that?
Um, for any of the people that have signed up yet?
Yeah. So
Okay, no, not yet. No, no, no. So we haven't gotten there yet. So myself and my colleague Ashley, we would be the people that would do that analysis, and so we'll follow up with everybody who is interested in that individually and talk through that process.
yeah. So that would be a next step after that
Yep.
date.
Yep.
So if there's interest after the webinar, all of you are in our system. So if if you beat us to it, feel free to respond with your interest.
Yep.
But our team will be reaching out to everyone who RSVP'd to
Yep.
connect on next steps. And then the next question is a little bit of a specific. Jennifer has kind of a specific question about her land. It's currently a horse boarding facility. So she's wondering, can the space be a shared space with horses already at the property instead of like a sheep agrivoltaics type situation?
It's a good question. I think like we have not researched that or really gotten into the details on that. I think we've we have explored. We're doing an agricultural project with a farm out in the Phoenix, where they're gonna kind of incorporate cattle grazing. The panels are gonna be higher than sort of normal, and so they can sort of maneuver in those areas. So that is certainly a potential option. I wouldn't say like it couldn't explore it as a potential to look at. It's just one of the things. It's more expensive to build, the systems higher up, so it's just something we would have to factor in. But certainly something we can contemplate. And again, as I mentioned, agrivoltaics are becoming more and more common, and the state has provided some support to fund those types of projects. So it's something we would like to do more of for sure.
Right, right. The state's very supportive of kind of new new practices or
Yeah,
tactics that expand solar development. So, as Matt said, that could be something to explore.
yeah, totally.
Cool. And then one more. This is around like any concerns with groundwater pollution. So, Dennis asked, what is the potential groundwater pollution from chemicals potentially leaching from the solar panels?
Yeah, I mean, so there have been different technologies over the years that have had different I think different metals and stuff. I mean, the typical polycrystalline silicone module that we use is pretty basic. There's not a lot of um, you know, metals in it other than, it's silicon, which is fairly common. It's glass, it's some copper. So I think there's a pretty and there's some good literature that we can share where it's like the impacts to the soil from projects are, I mean, not really traceable. There is, if a right, for example, it's glass. If a panel breaks, we are made aware of it and then we go replace it, right? It doesn't benefit us to just leave something out there. So, otherwise they're just coated in glass. So there's not really any other, leaching or anything that's going to come from that. So again, like if there's damage to a panel, we're out there within a few days to go in and change that and replace it and then, recycle the panel. So, and honestly, like, a lot of farmland is treated with a lot of different chemicals. And if we're removing a piece of land from agricultural service, like there's an argument to be made that we're actually, letting the soil kind of regenerate. So that's more my general sense of things. I'm not a soil expert nor an agricultural expert, so someone could tell me that I'm not correct, but that's sort of my layman's understanding of how these things can work.
Yeah, and like you said, we do have a lot of literature on it, so we're happy to share some of that
Yeah,
as follow-up. Great question, though. And I know that's a concern, that we hear quite often. Okay, we've got three more questions, lots of questions.
Great.
One is around what happens if the initial operator goes out of business?
Great question. Yeah, so part of the lease within our lease, and this is standard in all leases, is if the system, like let's say the operator went out of business, someone would buy that system, but the obligations of the lease would remain, right? So like that would for the lifetime of that project, the lease would be all the payments and all the maintenance and all that system would be required of anyone who owns it. If the system is not operational, I think it's 270 days in the lease, it has to be removed. And to help ensure that that happens, this is pretty standard at this point. Towns will require a decommissioning bond that we have to pay if we build a system, we have to pay into it every single year. So if in that unlikely scenario that someone goes out of business and the system is no longer operational, the bond will cover the cost of removing the system and restoring it back to the way it was. And so that's in our lease. If the system's not operational, it gets removed at the end of the lease term, it gets removed and everything, is restored. We're literally going in and digging down and cutting out the steel or removing the wiring. So, most of these projects have not been around that long to really get to that point. But and these things, they are generating value, right? We are selling electricity to the grid. Electricity prices continue to go up. So there's a long-term value that they're providing that, it would be strange if someone decided that I'm just going to abandon this project when it's, once the investment is made and it's making electricity, the sort of long-term maintenance cost is fairly minimal, that it would make sense that people are going to continue to make sure it's operating. So
Cool. And I think you addressed this, Matt, but this came in before you kind of got into this. But
yeah.
what happens to the panels at end of life? I guess, is there anything additional you want to add to what you just said?
It's I think with any industry, right? Like recycling is, I think people are still figuring it out and how best to do it. But we recycle our panels. There are groups locally that will recycle solar panels. And I think there's an industry sort of being built around that. And as more and more, if a solar panel gets to the end of its useful life, which we'll certainly see more of, that there's more of a growth industry for people to recycle these. And that is, that is ultimately, I mean, right, it's all usable material. It's all recyclable material. It's just a matter of kind of building the infrastructure to support that happening.
Yeah, and basically, as you said, just to reiterate, that decommissioning at the end of the life is built into the contract. There's already a pre-plan for that. Few more questions in here. One is just around current administration and kind of changing, subsidies, policies, all of that. Do you expect federal subsidies for solar to decline under this administration?
It's a great question. Like, I think, we've been doing this for a long time. Solar there's been a lot of ups and downs in the solar industry, and yet we're still here. So there's no question that the current administration has, suggested some cuts could be coming to sort of some of the federal programs that support solar. I think we have some expectation that will happen at some point. But we've sort of seen this before. It's not really new to us. We have to be nimble and sort of adjust to that. The interesting thing with solar, right? It's like if someone came today, and this is probably a good thing is to talk about timeline, right? Someone came today and said, I would like to lease my land for solar. Great, we'll sign you up. Like the process that you have to go through, like you're really 2 years away from even starting construction. Like that is the timeline that it takes these days to get there. And that's because of utility timelines, permitting timelines, long lead time items to get equipment. I mean, all of that stuff combined kind of pushes that timeline. So, we just sort of, who knows what's going to happen, in 2 to 3 years, we don't really know what the market's going to look like. So we just sort of push forward. And if we have a good project, like the goal is that we'll be able to make it work. And as I mentioned, even with policy change, electricity costs have gone up. I mean, I'm sure people have seen their electricity bills over the last several months. They are going up a lot. And that that drives the income potential of these projects as more as electricity rates go up. So, there's we sort of see that scenario playing out where we will continue to be able to build these projects even with some of that uncertainty built into it.
Awesome. We got a few more questions. I don't know if you want to hold and keep going through the presentation, Matt,
Yeah,
or
I'll just do a quick process and then we
okay,
can maybe
okay.
jump into that. So I sort of alluded to this, but probably it's good to, so someone calls and says, hey, will you look at my land? We'll provide you sort of this high level overview of this is how this works. We'll look at, what the interconnection looks like at your site. Is there capacity available? Is there three-phase available? If it is, that's obviously a great sign. We'll kind of go to the next level and do a more site-specific review of the permitting requirements or if there's wetlands or those types of things. And then if that all, you pass through all of those hoops, it looks good. We would propose a letter of intent and this property owner consent. And that's kind of the first stage that we can submit an application to the utility that really gets the process rolling. And then there's a couple different milestones with the utility review. They provide an initial screen. And if that looks good, then we can move to the next stage, which is a more detailed study, which can run somewhere between 6 to 8 months. And we can do sort of other work in that time in parallel. But oftentimes that final interconnection study will lay out like, okay, here's the cost to do this. Here's our timeline to do this. And even, determine how big of a system that we can actually build. So that is kind of the biggest stage of the development task. Once we've secured interconnection, secured permits, and finalized land lease agreements, and there's some other things as well. That's when we would proceed into the next stage of the project, which is really moving into detailed engineering, procurement, and then ultimately construction. And as I mentioned, that process can range from 1 to 3 years, depending on a lot of different factors. So that's kind of the quick overview of the process. So yeah, if we want to jump into some other questions.
Sure. So William asked, does the landowner get any preferred electrical rate?
So this is they could, as I mentioned, offtake is part of the development process, right? So sometimes the offtake is just, the way it works, like we end up doing it with just a larger commercial entity or, like I said, a home leasing or something like that. And so all the electricity is dedicated to them. New York has made it a lot easier to sort of provide some flexibility. So I think the shorter answer is potentially. It's something we could certainly explore, right?
Well,
There is a way to do it. It's just it's a lot easier than it used to be. So it's certainly something we can consider.
and it sounds like it'd be kind of specific to their project that you'd work
Yeah,
with.
I think so.
Okay. Okay. Someone asked about kind of how the process of like the land. So if we're dealing with a parcel that's under 20 acres, but to make it kind of fit the project and there's wooded areas, would we clear the wooded areas? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, it's certainly, I don't think we want to get into generally just like, yeah, we're just going to cut trees everywhere, but there are certainly scenarios where we have done that. And sometimes it's might just be on the periphery, right? Like we're just clearing some trees along the edge, or maybe it's some, oftentimes there's like um, what am I looking for? It's just sort of like a line of trees that are, splitting a field in half, and we might clear those trees out. So it's something that we would consider as you get further east and south in New York, a lot less farm field. There's a lot more tree clearing going on with projects. It's all like, there's a cost to that. It's expensive to cut down a lot of trees. And can also cause some issues just on the general construction. So, it's something in certain scenarios may be considered, but if we can avoid it, we do.
Yeah. And then damage to equipment, is the landowner liable for any damages to the equipment on the leased property?
No, I mean, I think like, no, they aren't, right? Like if the landowner, drives a four-wheeler and goes through the fence and hits the solar panels, like there might be some liability requirements there. But in general, like if there's a damage from an outside person or something like that, that's all covered in our insurance costs. So all of that risk is on us to deal with.
Great. And then restoring the land to the original state. Does this mean if fencing is removed to use the land, would that fencing be put back up in the areas at the end of the solar lease?
That's a good question. It could be. I mean, our when we have to assume the removal, we're assuming the complete removal of everything. Um, if the landowner had, I would like to keep this fence where it is, or I would like to, use it for some other purpose or something, like I think there's certainly some flexibility in that, and we can build that into the lease.
Great. We covered all the questions in the chat. There are a few that came in ahead of time. I don't know if we want to jump to that, Matt, or do you want to kind of wrap?
Yeah, let's go through, I'll just do like the case study,
Sure.
and then we can go into that. So this is just, this is a great example of one of the projects that we've done. We built this one, I think 3 years ago at this point. It's in the town of Ontario. It's about a 10 or 11 acre array there, about 2 megawatts. And so that one was actually, the town had specific setback requirements, so that is why it's kind of the way it is. Their land actually extended pretty far out to the side, but the town required us to keep it in this certain area. This system is the one I mentioned with home leasing, where home leasing is the off taker, and they get all of the electricity credits applied to, their headquarters, the other housing communities they own. This is sort of a legacy farming family. So John and Jim Schreiber are the owners. They're retired from farming, so they just lease the land at this point to other farmers, and they just saw this as an opportunity that they could get some additional income, and provide that sort of revenue stream for themselves and for their family in the future. And yeah, just kind of just shows sort of how these projects can be beneficial in the right scenario, right? They weren't really doing anything with most of this property, and they continue, right? It's continued to be used for farming. I think mostly it's just growing hay, but they still have the ability to use the land around the solar array to continue, sort of what they've done all along. There's John there, great guy. But yeah, he's right down the street from us, so I think he was excited to, he had been in touch with some other companies. There's a lot of big national firms, and I think he was excited to work with someone that was local to upstate New York, and provide that sort of long-term stability, right? We still maintain this project, and we will continue to maintain this project. And sort of have this long-term relationship over the lifetime of this project. And, that's really what we're all about, is just building those relationships with, the landowners, the towns that the projects are located in, and just making it sort of a very community-centric approach. So yeah, so I think that's sort of, how we differentiate ourselves, right? Like, it's not to suggest that it's wrong to do it any other way, but this is just GreenSpark's approach. Like most of our work is done in New York State. Most of our development work is done sort of between Buffalo and Syracuse, although we are looking at places a little further afield. But our intention is to be a long-term partner with the landowner, with the family, to make sure that they're getting everything that they need from the project, right? We often get calls from landowners to say, hey, these trees you planted are dead. Like, I need you to come out and fix them. And so we send our crews out and replace trees, or, maybe something happened to the fence. And so we're sort of always kind of on call to help deal with issues as they arise. And like I said, we're part of the regular maintenance of the system. We're sending folks out there a couple times a year anyways, just to make sure everything's working all right. Cool. We made it. So yeah, I guess you want to rip through some of those other questions, Kelsey?
Yeah, I was just looking through them. I think you've covered most all of them. But one other question I don't think we've addressed yet is, can you use pipeline ROW?
Sometimes. It's something like, we've encountered where we find out later on that there's a right of way that we have to sort of work around. Um, Generally speaking, the companies don't want us to build anything within the right of way. So, we can, if we can build around it or build up to it, that certainly works. We've been able to, like, we could build a road over it in certain cases. It's something that we would have to look at, but it can sort of impact the overall layout of a project for sure.
Great. And there's one participant, it's labeled iPhone, so I'm not sure who this is,
Okay.
but they have their hand raised, and I'm trying to see if they can let me know what question they have. Um, so if you're hearing this, drop it in the chat. Otherwise, Matt, it looks like most of the other questions are very specific to their specific parcel, and
Yeah,
potentially it looks like a few have been approached by other solar companies in the area. So they're just
yeah,
curious, kind of, I don't know if you want to address any of that, but it sounds like no
yeah. I mean,
follow-ups needed.
I would imagine anybody who has like more than 10 acres of land in New York State has probably received like 50 mailers from different solar companies. We send them out too. So that's just sort of the nature of it right now. There's a lot of interest. There's a lot of people out there that are doing this. I think I would just be aware, just for anyone, right? Like sometimes company's first step is like, let's sign a lease and just start there. And, although we've done that to some extent, you know, you want to understand the fundamentals of your project before you lock it up. Um, I've seen projects where people have sat on leases for long periods of time and never really done anything. So I would just caution, make sure, and for us too, like if we send you an agreement, like make sure that you probably want to have a lawyer review it just to make sure this isn't signing you up for something that you weren't prepared for. So, these lease agreements are obnoxiously long. It's just how it is. They're like 20 or 30 pages long. I wish that wasn't the case, but so just be aware of sort of what you're signing up for, and if you don't want to lock your land up for several years as they sort of evaluate that, like that's your option to make sure it's built into the agreement. So, and oftentimes, right, we'll do like a lease option where things don't go into effect until certain milestones are hit. And usually there's usually payments, like an option payment, an annual option payment to sort of secure that land. So there's a lot of different ways to go about doing it. I just, there's a lot of information that has to be figured out on these projects before you're really going to get certainty as to whether it's going to happen.
Cool. And then one more question just came in. Are you able to build if there are high tension lines on the property?
Yeah, generally we can't build under them, because that's sort of a utility easement. But we can build around them. We can get permission to build access road or run our own lines under it, but it would be something that we would have to avoid the actual sort of right of way that the utility has. They won't let us put things in there. So again, case by case, we can look at it and see, like, is there room that we can site the array, and then kind of work around those would be how we would do it.
Great. And then just reading the next question. If your road is a dead end and only 1 mile long, but it's only two phase, would that be a non-interest?
Um, it's tough to say, right? Like, I think it's something we would have to look at. Like, I don't want to just say like flat out it's a no. It sounds like it might be difficult, but if we looked at it, it's very possible there's a three-phase line that's at the end of the road, and maybe that three-phase line is connecting to a substation that has a ton of capacity, in which case it might work. So it is really like, that is why we do this sort of upfront, like let's take the time to understand, like, is there a potential here, so we're not wasting anybody's time.
Great. We've got a couple minutes left. Does anyone have any other questions we haven't addressed? If not, like I said at the top, we will be following up with both the recording. We'll also send some additional resources for those that might want to look at that on your own time. And then our team, Matt's team, will be following up directly to kind of start that process if it's of interest to kind of take that first step of kind of an assessment of your property.
Cool. Yeah, and like we said, please reach out to us. We're happy to have more conversations around it and answer any other questions you have. So, but appreciate everybody jumping on. This has been great, and yeah, look forward to speaking with folks here in the future.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for your time. Feel free if we didn't get to your specific question and you don't want to wait for us to reach out to you, send us a follow-up and we're happy to start that conversation sooner rather than later. But have a great day,
All right.
everyone.
Yeah, thanks everybody. Take care.
Thanks. Bye. Yeah, of course. Thanks, Jeffrey.